Carly Nicole Russell, a 25-year-old nursing student from Hoover, Alabama, triggered a national media storm on the night of July 13, 2023, when she made a distressing 911 call at exactly 9:34 p.m., claiming she had seen a small child no older than 3 wandering barefoot and alone on the shoulder of Interstate 459. Her voice on the call was urgent yet oddly composed, describing the child in a diaper, seemingly lost and in danger. She told the dispatcher she was pulling over her red Mercedes-Benz to assist. What followed would become one of the most bizarre and scrutinized missing persons cases in recent American history. Minutes after hanging up with emergency services, Carly made another call, this time to her brother's girlfriend, to describe the same child. Mid-conversation, she reportedly let out a scream, and the line went silent. That moment, the last audible sign of Carly, launched a massive search operation. Responding officers found her car on the side of the highway with its engine running, the door open, and her personal belongings, purse, phone, wig, and a fast food bag left inside. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of struggle, no visible injuries, no toddler, and no witness. Law enforcement began canvassing the area immediately. They deployed drones, thermal imaging, canine units, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers combed the wooded areas and drainage ditches nearby. News stations lit up with her story. The hashtag #FindCA began trending on Twitter. The community rallied with rare intensity, raising more than $63.00 in reward money in under 48 hours through Crime Stoppers. Her family, devastated and desperate, appeared on local and national news, pleading for her safe return. Her mother, Talitha Russell, tearfully begged the public to help bring her daughter home. The case, drawing eerie parallels to high-profile missing person stories, captivated the nation. Police, while cooperating fully with the media and community efforts, quietly began to notice inconsistencies. Surveillance footage showed Carly pulling over, but no toddler was seen on the highway, not in the footage and not by any passing motorists. Her own step-by-step movement, captured by her Apple Watch and Life 360 tracking data, indicated she had walked over 600 yards during the 911 call, a distance no barefoot child could logically cover alone at night. The deeper investigators dug, the more unusual the story became. Her browser history in the days leading up to the disappearance revealed a troubling pattern. She had searched "You have to pay for an Amber Alert," "How to steal money from a register without getting caught," and most notably, details about the movie Taken, a fictional film about abduction. She also looked up bus ticket schedules, including one-way trips to Nashville. Investigators began to reconsider the nature of the case, moving from rescue mode to possible deception. Then, 49 hours after vanishing without a trace, Carly suddenly reappeared, walking alone into her family's home in Hoover. Disheveled, but otherwise physically unharmed, she claimed to have been abducted by a man with orange hair and a bald spot, who had forced her into a vehicle, transported her to a remote location, and held her captive in the back of an 18-wheeler. She said a woman helped care for her, fed her, and forced her to pose for photographs. Carly said she eventually escaped and made her way home on foot. Initially, her story was accepted at face value, especially by her family and much of the public, who were just grateful she was alive. But as law enforcement pressed for specifics, Carly's narrative began to unravel. Medical examinations showed no signs of injury, restraint, or trauma. Her clothes were intact. She hadn't been sexually assaulted or physically harmed. The cash she had with her $107 hidden in her sock was unexplained. There was no evidence of another person being present, no witnesses, number surveillance capturing any truck or abduction, and no missing children in the area. Public sympathy began to shift into skepticism. Police then revealed that they had no reason to believe any crime had occurred. On July 24th, Carly's attorney released a written statement admitting that the entire abduction story was a fabrication. There was no toddler, no abduction, number 18-wheeler, no captors, nothing. Everything had been a hoax. The admission stunned the public. Many who had prayed, donated, and volunteered felt deceived and angry. Authorities were furious at the waste of resources and the potential damage to future credible missing persons cases, especially involving Black women, who already faced disproportionate media neglect. Hoover Police Chief Nick Derzies publicly condemned the hoax, noting the extensive manpower and taxpayer resources consumed over the two-day search. The district attorney charged Carly with 2 misdemeanors, falsely reporting an incident and making a false statement to law enforcement. In court proceedings held in March 2024, Carly pled guilty to both counts, although prosecutors asked for jail time, citing the scale and seriousness of the hoax. The judge imposed a suspended 6-month sentence, 1 year of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay nearly $18,000 in restitution to cover investigative costs. In court, Carly expressed deep remorse, stating, "I made a terrible mistake, and I accept full responsibility for my actions. I never meant to hurt anyone, especially those who cared about me and worked to find me." Her lawyer revealed that she had been dealing with mental health challenges and had since begun receiving treatment. The public remained divided, some calling for more severe consequences, others urging compassion. But the story had already left an imprint. What began as a chilling tale of a woman risking her safety to save a child on a dark highway had twisted into a sensational example of media manipulation, emotional deception, and the consequences of viral storytelling in the age of the internet. Carly Russell's case sparked intense debates about attention-seeking behavior, mental health, race, and the fragile nature of public trust. In the hours following Carly Russell's disappearance, the city of Hoover, Alabama, transformed almost overnight into the epicenter of a large-scale missing person investigation that would soon capture national attention as news spread that a 25-year-old woman had called 911 to report a toddler walking alone on a dark highway and then vanished without a trace. Residents were left gripped by a mix of confusion, fear, and an overwhelming urge to help. Emergency crews cordoned off the area where Carly's red Mercedes-Benz was found abandoned, its engine still humming faintly under the low buzz of the interstate streetlights. Her purse, complete with her ID and credit cards, her Apple Watch, her wig, and an uneaten takeout meal sat in plain view inside the vehicle. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no discarded shoes, nothing but silence. Within hours, the Hoover Police Department expanded its search radius and contacted state agencies and federal partners, triggering a widespread operation that included drone surveillance, search and rescue dogs, and helicopter patrols flying above thick woodlands and grassy embankments. Firefighters and volunteers slogged through muddy culverts, drainage ditches, and the overgrown brush flanking the freeway, searching desperately for footprints, discarded clothing, or any other evidence that might suggest Carly's direction of travel. Each passing hour without a lead heightened the sense of urgency. By sunrise on July 14th, over 100 volunteers had already gathered at a local church offering to assist, while social media exploded with images of Carly's smiling face. Her story reshared by influencers, celebrities, and activists across the country. #FindCarlee began trending on Twitter. Facebook community groups were flooded with theories and prayer requests. TikTok users began posting psychic readings and map overlays, speculating whether she had been abducted, sex trafficked, or even taken by someone she knew. Amid the digital noise, one thing remained clear: no one could locate Carly, and time was running out. Local businesses donated supplies, flashlights, water bottles, reflective vests. Churches organized prayer circles, and mothers held their children closer as fear swept through the community. News vans parked outside the Russell family home, and Carly's parents gave emotional statements through tears. Her mother, Talida, described Carly as someone who would stop and help anyone in need, a deeply empathetic woman who couldn't ignore a child on the side of the road. Her father, Carlos, stood silently beside her, visibly shattered. As the search entered its second day, law enforcement established a command center and invited the FBI to consult. Analysts combed through traffic cameras and cell phone data, trying to piece together the final moments before Carly disappeared. One camera had captured her vehicle pulling over to the shoulder, but no toddler, no second vehicle, and no other person appeared on any footage before or after the call. The footage raised troubling questions. Where had the child gone? Could Carly have imagined the sighting? Had she been lured? Investigators grew increasingly uneasy as her phone records revealed unusual internet searches. Made days before the incident, she had searched terms like Amber Alert cost, how to steal from a cash register, do you have to pay for an Amber Alert, and even a scene summary of the movie Taken. These searches suggested some degree of premeditation and unsettling development that law enforcement did not yet disclose to the public. At the time, the city remained unified, determined, and hopeful. Every hour, new volunteers arrived to search despite the oppressive summer heat. Local restaurants sent meals to first responders. School gymnasiums opened as cooling centers for search teams. Carly's disappearance wasn't just a local news story anymore. It was becoming a national headline. By the evening of July 14th, the Hoover police chief gave a press conference stating that while there were still no confirmed leads, the investigation was progressing, and every effort was being made to find Carly alive. He declined to comment on the toddler claim, but confirmed that no missing children had been reported in the area. Meanwhile, news outlets began replaying the 911 call repeatedly, examining Carly's tone and word choice. Body language experts speculated on the sincerity of her voice, but many in the public still held on no hope. The idea that a young woman had gone missing while trying to help a vulnerable child felt like the embodiment of selflessness. Carly became, in a way, a symbol of compassion, a woman who risked her safety for a stranger. That perception would soon be shattered. Late on July 15th, 2 days after her disappearance, the Russell family's home was flooded with lights, not from news cameras, but from the police. Carly had returned. She had walked up to the front door, barefoot and shaken. Her family called 911, and paramedics arrived to take her to a nearby hospital for evaluation. The news spread instantly. Crowds of volunteers cried tears of relief. Online communities celebrated the miracle. The missing posters were taken down, but for detectives, her reappearance marked the beginning of a new phase, one less about finding Carly and more about understanding what really happened. She told investigators she had been abducted by a white man with orange hair and a bald spot, dragged into an 18-wheeler, and held hostage. She claimed she was stripped, photographed, and fed crackers before escaping. But doctors found no injuries, no cuts, no bruises, no trauma consistent with physical assault. She hadn't been drugged. Her clothes were clean and intact. Moreover, she still had $107 in cash hidden in her sock, and her story began to shift. Under questioning, law enforcement soon realized they were not investigating a kidnapping, but a fabrication. What had been a citywide crisis now hinted at being a personal hoax. Still, officials held back the full truth, hoping to avoid public backlash before facts were verified. In private, however, investigators were compiling a case that would soon erupt into national controversy. While the public celebrated her return, a quiet storm was brewing behind the scenes, one that would permanently damage the trust built. During the search that once unified Hoover under a shared mission had also drained resources, both emotional and financial, and the community, which had poured its heart into bringing Carly home, had no idea that the story they believed in was already beginning to fall apart. The shock of Carly Russell's safe return after 49 hours of frantic searching was swiftly eclipsed by a growing unease, one rooted not in what she had said, but in what she failed to explain. The initial relief felt by her family, law enforcement, and the broader public quickly gave way to a cautious silence as investigators began to piece together the inconsistencies in her account. Her story, while dramatic, lacked the concrete evidence one would expect from such a harrowing ordeal. She claimed to have been abducted by a man with orange hair and a bald spot, forced into an 18-wheeler, taken to a hidden location, undressed, and photographed, it despite the gravity of her claims. Medical professionals who examined her found no visible injuries, no bruises, scratches, ligature marks, or signs of sexual assault. Her clothes were intact, her body was clean, and she had no evidence of prolonged exposure, restraint, or stress-related trauma. The $107 in cash hidden in her sock added another confusing layer. Why would an abductor strip her, photograph her, and yet not take her money or phone? Law enforcement, still treading carefully, began quietly cross-referencing her timeline with surveillance footage, GPS data, and call logs. The puzzle became harder to justify with each new detail. Traffic cameras didn't show any second vehicle or suspect at the scene. Her 911 call showed no emotional escalation, no sign of panic, and she had calmly described the toddler as if reading from a script. Then came the most damning evidence: her internet search history, days before she disappeared. Carly had searched "Do you have to pay for an Amber Alert?", "How to steal from a register without getting caught," and most tellingly, Birmingham bus station schedule and Taken movie abduction plot. These queries pointed to premeditation, not trauma. Investigators began to suspect what no one wanted to say aloud, that Carly had staged her own disappearance. Still, The police were measured in their communication, wary of accusing a young black woman of lying without absolute certainty, especially given the national attention and sensitive social dynamics. But internally, they were preparing for what they increasingly saw as inevitable. This was a hoax. The media, which had once sympathetically covered Carly's return, also began noticing cracks. Journalists asked questions during press briefings that law enforcement declined to answer. Experts in behavioral analysis were invited on talk shows, many of them gently casting doubt on her story. Body language analysts broke down her family's statements, noting shifts in tone and eye contact. Yet in public, her family remained resolute, still asking for privacy and expressing gratitude for her safe return. Then, on July 24th, the tide turned completely. Hoover Police Chief Nick Durzies held a press conference in which he revealed that Carly Russell, through her attorney, had admitted the entire abduction was a fabrication. There was no child on the highway. There was no man with orange hair. There was no truck, no abduction, no escape, and no captors. Carly had lied. The collective gasp was almost audible across the internet. What had once been a story of bravery and community spirit collapsed into a tangled web of deception and disappointment. People who had posted her photo, walked in sweltering, heat to find her, or donated money to the reward fund felt betrayed. Memes began circulating online within hours, mocking Carly's story, especially her mention of the fictional toddler and crackers fed by imaginary captors. Some joked, others were furious. Public opinion split sharply. Many called for her arrest, demanding accountability for the emotional manipulation and waste of taxpayer-funded resources. Others pleaded for empathy, arguing that Carly's actions were a cry for help rooted in mental health struggles. The media pivoted as well from compassionate coverage to scrutiny and moral outrage. News segments began highlighting the statistics of missing persons, especially black women, whose cases often don't get the attention Carly's did. Advocates feared her false report might undermine future efforts to mobilize public attention. For real victims, meanwhile, police were already building a case. Carly was charged with 2 misdemeanors, false reporting to law enforcement, and falsely reporting an incident. Though these charges might seem minor, the implications were massive. The search had involved dozens of officers, aerial resources, and community manpower, all of which were diverted from other cases and emergencies. Financially, the city was burdened, and Crime Stoppers froze the reward fund. In August 2023, Carly's attorney publicly asked for leniency, stating she was under immense emotional pressure and suffering from unresolved mental health issues. He portrayed her actions not as malicious, but as an ill-conceived attempt to escape her circumstances. That explanation rang hollow for many. By the time she entered a guilty plea in March 2024, the emotional damage had already been done. The judge handed down a suspended 6-month sentence, 1 year of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, and an order to repay nearly $18,000 in restitution. In her courtroom statement, Carly said, "I take full responsibility for my actions. I was wrong. I understand that I caused pain, confusion, and anger. I ask for forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because I need it." The judge accepted her apology, noting that jail time would not serve the public interest, but emphasizing that her actions had serious consequences. Outside the courthouse, reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served. Others believed she got off lightly. News anchors debated the ethics of sympathy and punishment. Social media boiled over with comments, some supportive, others scathing. In the weeks that followed, Carly withdrew from the public eye. Her social media accounts were deleted. Her family issued no further statements. But the damage remained. The trust that once tied a community together in shared purpose now felt brittle, bruised. The generosity shown by thousands was stained with regret. People who once dropped everything to search for her began asking questions they never thought they'd have to. Why did she do it? What was she running from? What exactly was she trying to say? If anything, and perhaps most painfully, will anyone ever believe the next black woman who goes missing and pleads for help? In the aftermath of Carly Russell's confession and guilty plea, the ripple effects of her actions continued to spread, not only through her own life, but across the broader social landscape. She had briefly and controversially commanded. Her disappearance, once thought to be a tragic mystery, had transformed into a touchpoint for cultural, political, and psychological debate. What began as a missing persons case escalated into a moral reckoning. exposing rifts in how society approaches truth, race, empathy, and accountability in the digital age. While Carly receded from the public eye following the court's decision, her name lingered in headlines and hashtags for weeks. News pundits debated whether her punishment was too lenient or appropriately compassionate. Some argued that her mental health struggles demanded understanding rather than incarceration. Others viewed her actions as a betrayal of public trust that warranted harsher consequences. Her story sparked commentary from politicians, advocates, psychologists, and even celebrities, each offering their own take. On one hand, there were those who sympathized, young people especially, who saw in Carly a reflection of the unbearable pressures many face in silence. On the other hand, there were those who saw her as emblematic of a culture increasingly detached from responsibility. Social media, the very tool that had once amplified the call for her return, now dissected her motivations with ruthless intensity. Users reposted old photos of her, created side-by-side memes with courtroom sketches. Hashtags like #CA or LE Russell hoax and #No More Lies trended alongside think pieces and YouTube breakdowns. TikTok creators reenacted her story, some in parody, others in outrage. The speed with which the narrative had turned from a heartfelt rescue effort to public ridicule was dizzying, but also revealing. It showed how quickly support could be withdrawn when trust was broken, especially in an age where truth is often fought over in comment sections and sound bites. But beneath the spectacle, the consequences were tangible. Hoover's police department faced criticism for devoting so many resources to what turned out to be a lie, prompting discussions about prioritization and protocol in future disappearances. Emergency services reported being inundated with questions from residents about what had been wasted and whether their own safety had been compromised during the search. Volunteers, many of whom had taken time off work or donated money and supplies, expressed feelings of betrayal. Some felt manipulated, others simply disillusioned. Several churches that had organized prayer circles and vigils issued statements, urging forgiveness, but acknowledged the collective hurt left behind. Local businesses that had donated to the effort quietly distanced themselves from the controversy. And in the background, the real cost, emotional, financial, and reputational, was being tallied. Crime Stoppers refunded donations, police budgets were strained. Trust between citizens and authorities, often fragile to begin with, took another hit. For the Black community in particular, the case struck a sensitive nerve. Black women are disproportionately underrepresented in missing persons cases and receive far less media attention compared to white counterparts. Carly's hoax was seen by many as a setback and exception that risked being weaponized against the rule. Advocates feared that her false claim would give skeptics an excuse to ignore or doubt the next real case. Activists who had rallied around her now had to clarify their stance, issuing statements separating their support for Black women from endorsement of Carly's actions. Conversations around race, belief, and justice became more complicated. Online, arguments erupted between those who saw her as a troubled young woman needing support and those who viewed her as an opportunist who damaged real causes. Even those who sympathized with Carly questioned why she had remained silent about her motivations. Had she been trying to escape something at home? Was it a cry for help after a psychological breakdown? Or was it a calculated attempt for attention, made worse by how elaborately it had been staged? The absence of a clear answer only fueled speculation. Psychologists who reviewed her case publicly spoke in cautious terms, emphasizing the danger of diagnosing from a distance, but acknowledging that the pattern of her behavior, planning, attention-seeking, withdrawal could suggest underlying disorders such as factitious disorder or severe anxiety. A few mental health professionals used her case as a launch point to discuss how societal pressure, trauma, and isolation can sometimes manifest in extreme, illogical decisions. But the court of public opinion remained deeply divided. The media, sensing fatigue in the public's attention span, began to move on. But the legacy of the case lingered. Universities used the case in ethics and media literacy classes, analyzing how coverage shifted from compassion to condemnation. Journalists reflected on their own role. Had they amplified a false narrative too quickly? Could they have waited for more verification before broadcasting the toddler story? And what responsibility does media hold when the public is so quick to react emotionally? By late 2024, Carly's name had become shorthand for deception. The phrase "pulling a Carly" started appearing online to describe hoaxes or staged emergencies. This cultural shorthand was used flippantly in some circles, but more thoughtfully in others, especially in discussions about internet fame, validation, and mental health. Documentaries were already in production. A Netflix series was rumored. A major network optioned the rights to dramatize the incident. Yet through all the noise, Carly herself remained unseen, unheard, and unaccounted for in the public arena. Whether she would ever speak out in a full interview or memoir was uncertain. But public interest remained high. People wanted closure, or at least clarity. As the months passed, another kind of shift began away from punishment and outrage toward prevention and reflection. Community leaders in Hoover organized panels on mental health access, especially for young adults. Churches hosted workshops about social pressure, online image, and how to ask for help before reaching a breaking point. School counselors used the case to teach digital responsibility and emotional resilience. Slowly, the wound left by the hoax began to scab over, not forgotten, not forgiven by all, but absorbed as part of a larger conversation about how society handles crisis, truth, and vulnerability. For Carly, the future remained unclear, with a criminal record and a public reputation in tatters. The road to rebuilding her life would be long and likely lonely. But her story, whether viewed as a cautionary tale, a mental health crisis, or a cultural moment, had already taken root in the national consciousness. It raised uncomfortable questions we're still learning how to answer. Why do people believe lies when they want to be heroes? How do we separate empathy from gullibility? And what happens to a society when one person's fiction hijacks thousands of people's truths? In the end, Carly Russell's hoax left behind more than a trail of confusion. It left a mirror, held up to a society that craves heroes, demands justice, and struggles with the discomfort of complexity. Her false abduction wasn't just a lie, it was a disruption of public faith in institutions, a test of how deeply the internet age allows emotions to outpace facts. Though the legal proceedings concluded with a suspended sentence and mandated restitution, the cultural impact persisted. Like a haunting echo, months later, the questions remained unresolved. What does it mean to manipulate an entire community? Was Carly's decision an isolated implosion of mental health, or part of a broader crisis of identity and validation in the digital world? While she faded from the headlines, her name became synonymous with deception, discussed in classrooms, debated on panels, and referenced in the language of online culture. Her case fueled academic papers, podcast episodes, and long-form features, all attempting to dissect not just what happened, but why it mattered so much. Experts pointed to the psychology of false victimhood and the growing trend of performative crisis individuals seeking relevance or escape through staged trauma. But others warned against flattening Carly into a symbol. They urged people to consider the nuance, her age, her mental state, the unspoken pressure she may have faced. A few even speculated that she had internalized societal narratives so deeply about being ignored, unseen, or unloved that inventing her own crisis became the only way she believed she'd be noticed. Whether or not that's true, the damage was real. One of the most heartbreaking consequences was how her actions rippled outward, staining the credibility of other missing persons cases. In the months following the hoax, several legitimate disappearances received less traction online. Advocacy groups noted a drop in engagement, and some officers reported increased public skepticism when issuing new alerts. Journalists covering missing women in marginalized communities confessed to being met with eye rolls or dismissive comments referencing another Carly Russell situation. This erosion of trust was the hidden tax of her lie, a cost paid not by Carly, but by others who truly needed to be found. For victims' families, the hoax was salt in a wound. Many mothers who had once expressed solidarity with Carly's parents now spoke out, explaining how the hoax reopened their grief, making it harder to find help, to be heard, to convince strangers their children's lives still mattered. In a world already desensitized to suffering, Carly's story added another layer of cynicism, making it that much harder for real victims to break through the noise. Yet amid this fallout, another narrative quietly unfolded, one not a judgment, but reflection. In communities across the country, particularly among Black women, the incident prompted raw, honest conversations about vulnerability, pressure, and the cost of being overlooked. Some described how Carly's story, while flawed and dishonest, tapped into something familiar, the need to be rescued, not from kidnappers, but from invisibility. Others asked why it had taken a hoax to draw attention to the epidemic of missing Black women. Shouldn't the system have cared before? Why does it take drama and deception to galvanize attention? The uncomfortable truth was that Carly, by faking her abduction, had momentarily succeeded where thousands of real cases had failed. She made people care. That bitter irony was not lost on activists and scholars who used her case to spotlight systemic neglect, arguing that the real problem was not her lie, but the cultural conditions that made her believe it would work. Still, those arguments didn't absolve her. Forgiveness was slow and incomplete. Carly's own silence became a source of frustration. She issued no televised apology, no interview, no long-form statement detailing her motivations. This vacuum only deepened the speculation. Some believed she was protecting her mental health. Others suspected she was negotiating a media deal. Whatever the reason, her absence left the narrative unfinished. She remained both subject and mystery central to the story, yet no longer in control of how it was told. In the meantime, others stepped in to reshape the narrative. Documentary producers secured exclusive footage, authors pitched book deals. A few social media influencers even claimed to know the real story, though their claims were mostly speculative or fabricated. The truth, increasingly, was less important than the content it generated. In this way, Carly's hoax transcended its own reality, becoming mythologized, abstracted, and commodified, a case study not just in false reporting, but in the economy of modern attention. But perhaps the most sobering reflection came not from experts or influencers, but from everyday people, the ones who had searched in the heat, prayed in vigils, or cried in front of news cameras. They were the collateral damage, the human face of misplaced hope. Many described feeling ashamed, not just at being deceived, but at how deeply they had wanted to believe. That desire for something tragic but solvable, for a community to rally around, for a hero to return home, was itself a kind of vulnerability, one that Carly's story had exposed. And yet, even in betrayal, there was learning. Communities revisited their protocols for crisis response. Law enforcement improved their vetting processes. Mental health services were expanded in schools and local clinics. Teachers incorporated discussions of truth, consequences, and digital ethics into their curriculums. In this way, the hoax produced something unintended: growth. Not redemption, not resolution, but growth, rooted in reckoning. And maybe that is all that can be asked when truth collapses under the weight of a lie. As for Carly, the path forward remains murky. She may never fully explain her actions, and perhaps we don't deserve that explanation. Perhaps the real takeaway isn't what she did, but what we did in response, how we chose to believe, how quickly we rushed to judgment, and how deeply we longed for a story that ended with justice. Even if it was fiction, in a culture obsessed with visibility, Carly Russell made herself seen. But in doing so, she became something else entirely: not a villain, not a victim, but a mirror reflecting all the ways we fail to sit with ambiguity. Her hoax may be over, but the questions she raised will linger far longer than the headlines they once filled.